So there are a lot of different types of vehicles out there, and a lot of times we get questions about what wheels they should be using on their vehicle.
Hey Scott, what wheels do you think I should put on mine?
There are some things to note. The platform of vehicle that you have, whether it's all-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, or rear-wheel drive, often dictates the wheel fitment that you can choose. So we're going to talk about that and kind of how it affects some of the other modifications that you're going to do to your vehicle in the future. Let's get into it. What's going on? I'm Scott from Koenig, and as we get into this video, I want to tell you the difference of the different platforms that you'll use and what kind of wheels you should expect to run on them. So the first one is going to be pretty simple. That's front-wheel drive. You know it, you've loved it, you've probably driven it since the time you were, well, I don't know, since you had a license? Now, a lot of front-wheel drive cars, you've probably heard this said, front-wheel drive offsets, and that's because most of them tend to be higher positive, meaning that they're going to be plus offset, right? There really is no benefit about trying to stagger a front-wheel drive car. In fact, many times it's going to be the opposite. If you try to put a rear-wheel drive staggered look onto your vehicle, you might notice that the vehicle obviously feels real sloppy, especially on turning. And that's because it really wasn't set up for that. It wasn't set up geometry-wise. So you'll have people that will argue that it does nothing, but the truth is your car is meant to use what the factory gave it. So we can go a little bit more aggressive, but on a front-wheel drive car, the key really is going to be to make sure you do it square. So if you do it to the front, do it to the rear. Pretty simple. You know, a couple caveats though. So what are those caveats? Well, first off, I hope I'm saying the word right.
Caveat.
But second off, when we start talking about the different things that you could do to front-wheel drive cars, it depends. Are you running it on the track? Are you racing the car? You will notice, especially today, more than ever before, you're seeing a lot of guys that are on track, especially in road racing, and they're utilizing a wider wheel in the front than the rear. So how come I just told you about making sure that you stay square, and now I'm talking to you about running a reverse stagger? Let's get into what staggered is first, because I feel like we skipped over that. So staggered is kind of a general wheel term, and what it really means is that there's a different size from front to rear. Now, staggered could be used in a few different circumstances. One, generally, it's used to dictate what the width is. For example, if you run an 8.5 inch in the front and you're able to run a 9.5 inch in the rear, that would be a staggered setup. But you could also hear staggered referred to in diameter. You'll see these on a lot of domestic modern muscle cars where you're going to see things like where they run a 19 inch in the back and an 18 inch in the front, or a 20 inch in the back and a 19 inch in the front. So it can be used in the diameter wise, but for the most part, when you hear staggered fitment, they're going to be referring to the width. So now let's jump back into what I was saying about the front-wheel drive cars. So there's a lot of different science to this, and I'm not going to pretend to tell you that I'm an expert in it because, truthfully, I've never run a road race car, especially in front-wheel drive. But really what you're talking about here is the ability for the car to have more grip. So when it comes down to front-wheel drive cars, especially when they hit the racetrack, the one thing that a front-wheel drive car is always going to be battling is understeer. And a lot of the ways you can compensate understeer is by going with something that's wider in the front. It will help the rear rotate on entry, which is really critical to kind of balancing out that front-wheel drive race car. Again, this is one of those things that's very particular to each setup. You can't just throw a wider set of wheels on the car and expect everything to fall into line. But if you know what you're doing and if you can work with somebody that's really set up front-wheel drive race cars before, there is a large benefit to being able to run that reverse stagger as what we're talking about. So we've done the front, let's do the rear. So rear wheel drive is gonna be your next setup. Now, a lot of times rear wheel drive cars are gonna be blessed with the opportunity, blessed with the opportunity to be able to run a staggered setup, meaning that it could take a wider width on the rear. The cool thing about that for most people that have rear-wheel drive cars is you're gonna be able to find a wheel that's gonna be able to take a little bit more width in the rear, has a little bit more lip or more concavity, usually has a lower offset. It's gonna make the car look tougher. You're gonna be able to do this without too much hassle. When it comes to rear-wheel drive cars, one thing you should understand is that many people, especially many racers, whether it be drag racing or even road racing, and this will be very argumentative, is that rear-wheel drive does have a superior ability to make the car kind of handle, right? To make the car point in the right direction, to make the car be able to have all the handling properties, especially when that weight distribution changes upon launch. There's a lot of properties there that make the car very fast. Now, you can argue this amongst yourselves. You want to talk about front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, do it in the comments below. Frankly, the comments help us anyway, so we're good with it. So when it comes down to a rear-wheel drive car, obviously the most notable thing when we talk about staggered fitment is going to be that you can run a wider wheel on the rear of the car. Now, doing that allows a lot of good handling properties. It's going to allow you to put a wider tire there, which gives you more contact patch, which makes it sure that you have more surface area grabbing the ground, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to put the power through to the rear wheels. So these are all benefits, and that's why people tend to go staggered, and as long as you do it to the point where you still keep the car completely functional, you'll find a lot of benefit there. So there's two things that we should talk about. First thing is squared setup. We talked about staggered fitments, we talked about reverse staggered fitments. Let's talk about square real quick, because it's gonna be important for our next platform. Square setup is essentially just running the same wheel and tire combination, front and rear. That's really all it is. So if you're gonna have a squared setup and you're gonna run 8.5 in the front, you're gonna run 8.5 in the rear. So now we talked about square setup, you know what it is, you feel good with it, I'm sure you already knew it before, but now we're gonna talk about all-wheel drive. And that's why I said square setup. All-wheel drive means that all wheels turn, all of them. All of them turn, so there's power going to all the wheels. Now, I don't wanna say all wheels equally, because we all know that there's cars that are gonna be rear-wheel drive biased, even though they're all-wheel drive, and cars that tend to be a little bit the opposite way. However, when we talk about all-wheel drive, we're still talking about the same type of theory. All wheels are spinning and pulling some sort of weight as they go down the racetrack, as they go down the street, whatever you want. Anyhow, bottom line is, all-wheel drive setups, they're going to be inherently looking for more squared setups. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not vehicles that exist that are all-wheel drive and have a staggered setup. But the one thing you'll have to note is the fact that this is where the tires, the wheel and tire setup, overall rolling diameter, is very, very important. It's important for a lot of reasons. Your diffs are all expecting that gearing and seeing those same RPMs. Your traction control, your vehicle stability control, all those inner safety systems that are on vehicles nowadays, they're expecting to see certain revolutions per minute out of a tire and certain circumferences. So once you change the overall rolling diameter of that tire, well, now you start to mess with the computers that are in the car. The takeaway out of all these is pick the correct functional wheel setup for your platform. So I understand that a lot of this information is fairly primitive and you can find it all over the internet, but the reason we're talking about it is because we still get so many questions about the different setups and why you should use it and etc. So here it is, just a little bit of basic information, and while you may be well versed on what these platforms are and what they should have difference-wise and wheel packages, there's some other people that are starting in the car industry that may not. So we're putting it all here just so you can get a kind of taste for it. That's it. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.